In the spring of 1996, a team standing between the paws of the Great Sphinx pointed a machine at the ground, and the ground answered back with something that should not have been there. Not solid rock, not sand. A shape. A clean rectangular void, buried in the bedrock directly beneath the monument's left paw, roughly 12 meters long and 9 meters wide, sitting about 5 meters down. Rectangles do not form by accident inside limestone. Water carves curves. Erosion carves cracks. Nature does not carve corners. And this had corners. The men reading the monitors went quiet, because a rectangular hollow with straight edges cut into the rock under the most famous statue on the planet is not a cave. It is a room. A room nobody built a door for. A room nobody has ever entered. A room that, according to the official version of history, is not supposed to exist at all. That reading has never been fully published. The permit that allowed the scan was quietly pulled. And for almost 30 years, that rectangle has sat in the dark under 4,000 tons of stone, while the people who found it were told, in so many words, to stop looking. Most tourists who visit Giza walk right past the spot where it was found. They photograph the face. They pose with the paws. They never once suspect that a few meters beneath their feet is a sealed space that could push the age of human civilization back by thousands of years. Because here is the part nobody wants to say out loud. If that chamber holds what some researchers believe it holds, then the Sphinx is not just older than we think. It is older than the pyramids, older than the pharaohs, older than the entire timeline written in every textbook you have ever read. And this rectangle is only the first thing they found, because in the years after that scan, other machines came to Giza. And what they detected under the Sphinx and the plateau around it was far bigger, far deeper, and far stranger than one buried room. There are shafts down there, there are tunnels, and there may be something at the bottom of them that the world has spent a century arguing over without ever being allowed to dig. Before we are done, you are going to see why 3 separate scientific teams using 3 different technologies across 3 different decades all came back saying the same impossible thing. You are going to see the exact moment a live television broadcast of the opening was canceled. And you are going to see the reading from 2026 that suggests there is not 1 Sphinx buried at Giza, but 2. Let me show you the trail, because it is real, it is documented, and it leads somewhere the authorities have refused to follow. Start with that 1996 survey, because it is the cleanest piece of hard science in the whole story. The team came from Florida State University, working alongside geologists from Boston University. They were not treasure hunters. They were using ground-penetrating radar and seismic equipment, the same technology used to map oil fields and find sinkholes under highways. You send energy into the rock, you measure how it bounces back, and the pattern tells you where the solid stone stops and where the empty space begins. When they mapped the bedrock under the Sphinx, the empty space had a geometry, a low-velocity anomaly, in the language of the report. A pocket where the seismic waves slowed down and scattered the way they do when they hit a void instead of stone. 12 meters by 9, about 5 meters deep, right under the left paw. And it was not alone. The readings suggested more than 1 hollow passages. A second cavity further back. The kind of pattern you get not from a single bubble in the rock, but from something arranged. Understand what seismic refraction actually does, because it matters for how much you trust this. You place sensors in a line across the ground, and you generate a shock, a small controlled impact. And then you time how long the wave takes to travel through the rock and reach each sensor. Sound moves fast through dense solid stone and slow through fractured or empty ground. By reading the arrival times, you can build a cross-section of what is under your feet without removing a single grain of sand. It is the same physics oil companies stake billions on. And when the team ran those lines across the Sphinx enclosure, The waves under the left paw slowed down and scattered in a way that only happens when the energy hits a gap. In the published language of the study, a low-velocity anomaly. In plain language, a hole. The mainstream explanation was immediate and reasonable. Limestone dissolves. Water moving through the plateau over millions of years can carve natural cavities, and the Giza bedrock is riddled with them. A void under the Sphinx could simply be karst, a natural dissolution pocket. Nothing more. The plateau does have natural fissures. One enormous crack runs right through the body of the monument. So the skeptics were not inventing an excuse out of thin air. But that explanation has a problem. Karst cavities are irregular. They follow cracks and weak seams in the rock. They branch and pinch and wander. What the seismic data described was a boxy, defined space with a flat orientation, sitting at a consistent depth, in a spot that just happens to be dead center under the monument's forepaws. Nature carving a rough hollow somewhere in the plateau is ordinary. Nature carving a rectangle precisely under the paws of a statue is a coincidence that starts to strain belief. And the geologists knew it, which is exactly why the finding made people nervous. Here is the first thing the mainstream account leaves out. This was not the first time somebody scanned under the Sphinx and got a strange answer. It was at least the third. Go back to 1977. A team from SRI International, the same research institute that did remote sensing work with NASA, came to Giza and ran electrical resistivity and acoustic surveys around the Sphinx. Resistivity works by measuring how easily electric current passes through the ground. Solid, wet rock conducts one way. Empty air conducts another. And their instruments flagged anomalies. They even drilled a few small boreholes into the rock near the monument to check. Some came back with nothing but rubble. But the anomalies were there, logged, in the record, decades before anyone had a commercial reason to hype them. Then, in 1987, a team from Waseda University in Tokyo, led by a respected Japanese archaeologist, brought electromagnetic sounding equipment to the plateau. They were not fringe researchers. They were a serious academic mission. And they reported three things that should stop you cold. A cavity oriented north to south, running under the body of the Sphinx. A pocket of water 2 to 3 meters below the surface near one of the hind paws. And another hollow near the opposite hind paw. Three separate anomalies from an independent team using completely different technology than the Americans would use 9 years later. And they pointed to the same conclusion. There is space under the Sphinx that is not solid rock. 3 surveys, 3 different decades, 3 different countries, 3 different methods: radar, seismic, resistivity, electromagnetic sounding. And every one of them came back saying the same thing. Not similar things, the same thing. There is something hollow beneath the Great Sphinx. That is the second clue. And it is the one that turns a single odd reading into a pattern nobody can wave away. But it raises the obvious question. If the machines keep finding empty space down there, why has nobody ever gone in to look? Here is where it gets strange. Because the answer is not that they could not. The answer is that they were stopped. In 1996, that Florida State survey was funded through a private American foundation. And the plan was aggressive. There was talk of a live television broadcast, a major network ready to film the opening of whatever lay beneath the paws, in front of a global audience. And then, almost overnight, the momentum died. The permit was quietly restricted. The results were bound up in contractual agreements with the Egyptian Antiquities authorities and never released in full. The men who ran the survey were adamant, in private, that their instruments had confirmed a network of passages and chambers under the Sphinx. Publicly, the whole thing was allowed to go cold. No broadcast, no excavation. No follow-up dig where the anomaly sat. The official reasons were practical, and they are not nothing. The Sphinx is fragile. It has been eaten by weather and salt for thousands of years, patched and repatched, and the idea of drilling a shaft beneath its structural base is a genuine nightmare for conservationists. One bad tunnel and the paw comes down. There is also the matter of the water table, which has risen with the growth of Cairo and floods the lowest levels of the plateau. But that explanation has a problem too. Non-invasive scanning does not require drilling. You can map a void with radar and muons without touching a single stone. And we know this because we have done exactly that on the pyramid next door. The refusal has never really been about engineering. Geologists who have worked the site describe the resistance as ideological rather than logistical. There is a version of ancient history that Giza is supposed to confirm, and a sealed rectangular room that predates it does not fit. It is easier to leave the rock closed than to open a question nobody in charge wants asked. And that question has a name. It has had a name for almost 100 years. In the early 20th century, an American man who was not an archaeologist, not a geologist, not anything to do with Egypt, began describing a chamber beneath the Sphinx while in a trance state. He called it a hall of records. He claimed that a lost civilization, far older than dynastic Egypt, had sealed away the complete history of their world in a room connected to the Sphinx's paw, and that it would be found again near the end of the 20th century. It sounds like exactly what it is: a psychic prophecy from a man with no credentials. And for most of the century, it was treated as a curiosity, a piece of folklore. For decades, scholars dismissed it entirely. And they were right to be skeptical. A vision is not evidence. But then the machines showed up. And the machines, using physics instead of prophecy, kept flagging a hollow rectangular space under the paw. The uncomfortable thing is not that the prophecy was correct. It is that the prophecy described a specific shape in a specific location, and independent instruments run by serious scientists later detected a void of roughly that shape in roughly that location. That does not prove a hall of records, but it does mean the spot everybody was told to ignore is the exact spot the ground keeps insisting is not solid. If you are still with me this far into the investigation, subscribe, because this channel follows the discoveries that get buried the moment they threaten the official timeline. And there are more of them than you would ever believe. Now here is where the ancient descriptions come back into the story, because the Egyptians themselves told us there was a hidden world beneath Giza. We just filed it under mythology. In their own sacred texts, the region beneath the plateau was described as the Duat, a subterranean realm of passages and chambers through which the soul had to travel. Egyptologists have always read this as pure religion, a spiritual map of the afterlife, with no physical reality behind it. And that reading was reasonable, until you notice how specific the geography gets. The texts describe a network of caverns, gates, and hidden waterways under the sacred ground. They describe a place of shafts and levels. For centuries, that was symbolism. But the plateau at Giza genuinely does sit above a natural cave system in the limestone. There genuinely are hollows and fissures running beneath it. The Egyptians who built here lived on top of a honeycombed rock, and when they wrote about an underworld of chambers beneath the sacred land, they may not have been inventing a metaphor. They may have been describing what was literally under their feet. Think about how the ancient Egyptians actually worked. These were people who aligned the sides of the Great Pyramid to the cardinal directions with an error smaller than a modern surveyor would tolerate. People who tracked the stars with obsessive precision and built their sacred structures to mirror the sky. When people that careful, that literal, that obsessed with getting the measurements right tell you there is a realm of chambers and passages beneath the sacred ground, the lazy move is to assume they were just making up a bedtime story about the afterlife. The harder question, the honest one, is whether they were describing the ground the way they described everything else, accurately. There is a detail in those texts that gets glossed over. The underworld is described not as one open cavern, but as a sequence. Gates, levels, a soul passing downward through stage after stage. Now, hold that description next to the 2025 radar claim of stacked multi-level structures and vertical shafts descending in ordered rows. You do not have to believe the radar to notice that the ancient text and the modern scan are describing the same shape, levels stacked in sequence, a way down through them. Either that is a coincidence spanning 4,000 years, or the priests knew something about what was under their feet that we are only now pointing instruments at. That is the reframe the whole story turns on. The Duat was not necessarily a fantasy. It may have been a report. And if the priests who ran Giza knew there were real caverns under the plateau, then the idea of a deliberately built chamber tucked into that natural network beneath the Sphinx stops sounding like fiction and starts sounding like architecture. A hidden space beneath the pause would not be a violation of Egyptian belief. It would be the physical anchor the entire belief was built around. Which brings us to the biggest reveal in this entire investigation. Because in the last 2 years, the scanning came back to Giza. And this time, it did not find a room. It found a machine's worth of structure buried deep enough to rewrite the plateau entirely. In March of 2025, a team of Italian researchers held a press conference in Bologna and announced results from a project focused on the Second Great Pyramid, the Pyramid of Khafre. The same pharaoh whose face many believe the Sphinx wears. Their tool was synthetic aperture radar, satellite-based technology normally used to map terrain and detect ground movement from orbit, roughly 400 miles up. They ran the radar data through proprietary software that, they claim, can pick up tiny vibrations in the rock and translate them into an image of what lies below. What they said they found does not sound like archaeology. It sounds like engineering. 8 enormous vertical structures, cylindrical shafts, hollow, with what they described as descending spiral pathways running down their insides, arranged in 2 neat parallel rows beneath the plateau. And these shafts did not stop a few meters down. According to their model, they plunge more than 600 meters into the earth before opening into 2 massive cube-shaped chambers at the bottom. Above them, closer to the surface, they described stacked multi-level structures connected by geometric passageways and tunnels. A tunnel system, they suggested, could run for something like 2 kilometers, potentially linking the space beneath all 3 of the Great Pyramids into a single subterranean complex. Read those numbers again. 8 symmetrical vertical shafts with spiral interiors descending over half a kilometer, arranged in parallel rows, feeding into cubic chambers. That is not a description of a cave. Caves do not come in matching sets of 8. Caves do not descend in straight vertical lines in 2 parallel rows. If the reading is even partly right, somebody cut those, and this was not the team's first pass at Giza. Years earlier, the same 2 lead researchers had published peer-reviewed work applying their radar method to the Great Pyramid, claiming to reveal internal structure never mapped before. That earlier paper made it through review and into a scientific journal. So when they turned the same technique on the Khafre Pyramid and the ground beneath it, they were not strangers walking in off the street. They were building on a method they had already put their names to in print. Above the pharaoh's chamber, they described 5 stacked structures, each with multiple horizontal levels and a sloping roof mirroring a feature they said sat above the king's chamber in the pyramid next door. Everything about the way they described it was architectural: levels, rows, symmetry, repetition. The vocabulary of design, not geology. And then, in 2026, the same lead researcher went further, using the same satellite radar approach, and by mirroring the geometric line that runs from the center of the Khafre Pyramid through the existing Sphinx across to the opposite side of the plateau, the team announced they had detected a second buried structure. A mirror image of the Great Sphinx, they claimed, hidden beneath a mound of hardened sand over 100 feet high, with the same kind of vertical shafts and horizontal passages showing up underneath it that they say lie beneath the original. 2 sphinxes, one in the open, watched by millions, one buried, unseen, arranged in perfect geometric symmetry with the first. They stated 100% geometric correlation in the symmetry and put their confidence in the buried structure at around 80%. And an Egyptologist had actually floated the idea of a second twin sphinx more than a decade earlier, citing old records that spoke of lightning striking the monument, which he read as a memory of a second statue that was later destroyed. That is the reveal. Not a single room, but a possible complex. Shafts, chambers, tunnels, and a mirror monument, all reported under the same plateau that 3 separate surveys already flagged as hollow decades ago. Now, does this prove there is a lost supercivilization filing cabinet buried under the sand? Does it prove a hall of records, an ancient machine, a sealed archive of forgotten history? No. And this is the part of the investigation where we have to slow down and be honest, because the story is strong enough that it does not need to be exaggerated. The 2025 and 2026 radar claims are contested heavily. Synthetic aperture radar was not designed to image structures hundreds of meters underground, and many specialists argue that it simply cannot do what the team says it does. The signal does not reliably penetrate that deep, and turning faint satellite data into detailed pictures of spiral shafts requires layers of interpretation and proprietary software that outside scientists have not been able to check. The findings were announced through press conferences and podcasts before passing the kind of independent peer review that would let the rest of the field confirm them. Egypt's own former head of antiquities dismissed the underground city claims outright, pointing out that the area around the pyramids has been dug and studied for over a century without anyone finding shafts 600 meters deep. When a claim is that extraordinary and arrives without a shovel ever touching the ground, skepticism is not closed-mindedness. It is the correct response. But here is what the skeptics cannot make disappear, and this is the thing that keeps the story alive. Strip away the wildest 2025 claims entirely. Throw out the underground city. Throw out the second buried Sphinx. You are still left with the hard, boring, published science. You are still left with a 1992 seismic study in a real geoarchaeology journal, describing a roughly 12 by 9 meter void, about 5 meters under the Sphinx's paw. You are still left with the 1977 SRI resistivity anomalies. You are still left with the 1987 Japanese team's independent detection of cavities and a north-south passage. Those readings were made by conventional science using proven methods long before satellite radar and viral press conferences existed. And they were never explained away. They were just left unexcavated. That is the grounded version, and it is still remarkable. It does not require aliens or Atlantis. It only requires that there is at least one man-influenced or man-made hollow space beneath the Great Sphinx that has been detected over and over for 50 years and never opened. And even that modest, defensible claim is enough to embarrass the official story, because the official story says there is nothing there worth the risk of looking. So why does the door stay shut? Why, with all of this, has nobody driven a single non-invasive muon scanner up to the Sphinx the way they did to the pyramid next door? Because we know that works. In 2017, a project called Scan Pyramids used muon tomography, cosmic ray particles that rain down through the atmosphere and pass through solid rock, to peer inside the Great Pyramid without drilling a single hole. And they found a void, a huge one, a space at least 30 meters long, hidden above the Grand Gallery, that no one had known was there. It made the cover of a major scientific journal. It proved, beyond argument, that these monuments still hold sealed spaces, and that we now have the technology to find them without harming a single stone. We have done it to the pyramid. We have refused to do it to the Sphinx. The same non-destructive method that revealed a plane-sized hollow inside Khufu's monument has never been fully turned on the statue beside it, even though 3 separate surveys already told us where to point it. And there is a precedent for why that refusal matters, because we have watched this exact pattern play out and resolve. In 2015, radar scans of the tomb of the boy King Tutankhamun suggested empty space behind the painted walls, a possible hidden chamber, maybe even a lost queen's burial. The experts argued. Some said it was real, some said it was noise. The point is that the scan was taken seriously enough to test, and later imaging confirmed there really was a void where the radar said there would be. When the establishment decides a hidden chamber is worth investigating, it investigates. Under the Sphinx, it has decided the opposite. Not that the void is not there, that it is better not to know. Think about what that means. We live in an age where a satellite can read a license plate from orbit, where we can map the inside of a pyramid with particles born in outer space, where we have detected voids in solid stone from 400 miles up. And yet we still do not officially know what sits in a rectangular hollow 10 meters beneath the paws of the most photographed monument in human history. Not because we cannot find out, because we have chosen not to. And if that chamber is real, and if it is even a fraction as old as some geologists believe the Sphinx itself may be, then everything downstream of it starts to move. The Sphinx has water erosion on its enclosure walls that some researchers argue could only have come from heavy rainfall, rain that stopped falling on that part of Egypt thousands of years before the pharaoh Khafre was supposedly born. If they are right, the monument was already ancient when the pyramid builders arrived, and a sealed chamber beneath it would not be a tomb from the age of the pharaohs. It would be a message from whoever came before them, a chapter of the human story that we have not just lost, but sealed shut and guarded. That is the piece that would rewrite history. Not a room full of gold, a room that proves the timeline is wrong. That civilization did not begin where we said it began. That someone was building in stone, with intent, with geometry, long before the first name we know how to read was ever carved. We are not going to solve it in this video because nobody has been allowed to solve it in reality. The scans exist. The anomalies are logged in the scientific literature. The technology to look without harming a single stone is sitting in a lab right now. And still, the rectangle waits. It was detected, it was mapped, it was measured, and then it was closed. Somewhere under the paws of the Great Sphinx, 5 meters down in the dark, there is a space with straight edges and square corners that no living person has ever stood inside. It has been there through every empire, every war, every tourist, every sunrise over Giza for as long as the statue has faced the horizon. It is still there tonight, still sealed, still ignored, still waiting for someone with the will to open it and the courage to accept whatever answer comes out. The truth about where we came from may be lying in that room right now, and the only thing standing between us and it is a permit nobody will sign. If this is the kind of buried history that keeps you up at night, the next investigation is already on screen. Go watch it now, because the deeper you follow this trail, the clearer it becomes that the Sphinx is only the beginning of what they never wanted you to find.